Hey, I'm Shaye Wanner, and you are listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Whether you are a seasoned rancher or just curious about the cattle world, this podcast dives into the stories, science, and strategies shaping the future of ranching. Let's get started and keep your herd ahead of the herd. Folks, today we are going to talk about how Vence's virtual fence technology is helping Florida ranchers manage and care for their cattle through hurricanes, create thriving wildlife habitats, and even protect their cattle from natural predators. Jim Strickland is our guest today, and he has a hand in managing several ranches across the state of Florida, which he will describe much more thoroughly for us. And that's only a small portion of what he does. Jim is going to share his experiences as well as how his employees took to this technology as well. So with that, let's visit with Jim and learn about virtual fence and ranching in Florida. Well, good morning, Jim. It is a pleasure to have you on the podcast today, and we are going to be talking about your operation and how you utilize virtual fencing and kind of some of the benefits that you have been able to reap from this technology. To get started with everyone's favorite kickoff question, I don't know if it's everyone's, but it's mine. Why do you bet on the beef industry?
Well, one reason is I'm the sixth generation cattle rancher in the Strickland family here in Florida. Of course, Florida's the birthplace of the cattle industry in North America. First cattle, came here. I'm not going to go as far as saying it's in my DNA, but my father was in it, my grandfather, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather were all in it. It is my life, my passion, my love. I'm 70 years old, and I'm still doing at 70 what I wanted to do when I was 7. So I have been extremely blessed to do what I do and be in the cattle industry. I think that the opportunities now are huge. I've seen several times we didn't think our opportunities were not huge, as some of these cyclical problems and some of these disease problems. But now I think that, one, we have a great healthy product. I think that we can defend our product and the way that we treat those animals, the way we treat our land, because basically, without land, we're not in the cattle business. Without grass, we're not in the cattle business. I'm a cow-calf operation in South Florida, North Florida, and I feel that especially in these metropolitan areas, they want to know where their food comes from. So if we can produce a local food, whether it's Oklahoma, Texas, Nebraska, or Florida, I think that we're going to be able to expand that market. It looks like the National Cattlemen's Beef Association is working really hard in Washington, D.C., and we're getting a lot of work done on tariffs, on opening up markets, on protecting our cattle industry here in America with the lobbyists that we have in Washington. So I also have a 42-year-old son. He happens to be a U.S. diplomat and a lieutenant colonel in the Army. He's betting on me, betting on agriculture, and I've got a granddaughter that's 7. I have a daughter that's 3, and I have another daughter that is 7 also. So they're all betting on dad or granddad to continue the legacy. So there's my bet on the cattle industry in America.
Well, there's certainly a lot of generations of your family who have believed in the beef industry and are continuing to, and I always think that is really exciting to see. Now, before we really dive into the technology and virtual fencing aspect of this conversation, I'd like to learn a little bit more about kind of the size and scope of your ranch, because you said you're based in Florida, but I know you have several locations. So would you help give the listeners a little better idea of what your ranch kind of looks like today, so they get a feel for that?
That's what it looks like. Those are our native woods, and that happens to be a DNA tested cow in that picture that goes back to the first cattle that were brought here by Ponce de Leon. So I'm very proud. She's passed on, but that's our cattle industry. This is what our pastures look like. So we have 7 ranches, actually 8 now. My wife acquired one, of which I'm a partner in. But starting out, Strickland Ranch is composed of about 2 ranches. Then I have a partner on Big Red Cattle Company. Big Red Cattle Company, we lease out land to cabbage farmers and tomato farmers. We also cut sod at Big Red Cattle Company. We have a purebred Brayford herd on Big Red Cattle Company. We also cut and sell a lot of horse hay. We're fairly close to areas that have a lot of horses. So that's a really diverse operation. And moving on, we also have equestrian bull. We bought out a horse farm up the road, so we run a horse farm, and they have dressage arenas, team roping arenas, they have jumping arenas, and then we run a cattle operation on the back acreage there. And then moving on up towards Tampa Bay, we have two ranches up there. Two Smart Guys is one ranch, and the other one is what we call North Bull. A lot of our ranches are called Bull in LLCs because we were bullish on the cattle industry, Florida, and owning land whenever we really started robustly buying acreage up about 15 years ago. So we also have what I'm sitting on now, which is Blackbeard Ranch, and Strickland Ranch is contiguous to this. You wouldn't know the difference between Strickland Ranch and Blackbeard. Blackbeard is a managing partner of Blackbeard. I've got one of the best partners in the world. I see him about 3 times a year, and he trusts me and I trust him, which is the greatest partnership. We've been together now for almost 20 years. So Blackbeard's Ranch happened to have won the 2019 ESAP Award, Environmental Stewardship Awards Program, through NCBA and McDonald's and NRCS and USDA. I believe U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are some of the judges. So that was almost wholly in part to my wife, Julie Morris, which she owns Lost Girl Ranch. So Lost Girl Ranch is just north of us, about 4 miles where I'm sitting now. Strickland Ranch is to the west. We are basically a cow-calf operation here. I think all your listeners know the difference between a stock or a feeder and a cow-calf operation. That's what we are. But we do have a feedlot in North Florida. I'm a partner with Don Quincy, which owns Quincy Feedlot up there. So there's Quincy Strickland Ranch just south of University of Florida, where the world-famous football team, Florida Gators, are. So we have Quincy Strickland. He and I feed some cattle together, and then we take the meat products, and we have a retail operation to where we actually sell. We sell meat, we sell pork products. We have some of our own pigs here, and we do beef jerky and steaks and all those. That's not one of our big ends, but that is one of the things we do. Mainly the cattle here, we've got about 1,200 head of cattle right here on this ranch where I'm sitting. They're mainly Brangus and Brayford and Beefmaster. We use primarily Beefmaster bulls. We have to stay in the business. I feel like the Beefmaster and Brangus are the best for my environment, my ecosystem that we have here in Florida. We really put a selection criteria on our heifers that we save. We don't buy any cattle. So, if the cattle that I have now are good, it's because I've been selecting them for the last 52 years. If they're not good, it's because I've been selecting them for the last 52 years. We also have a Beefmaster, purebred Beefmaster ranch, which is south of us at what we call Blackbeard's Prairie Ranch. And that is all purebred Beefmasters. They're all papered, and we breed them to Beefmaster bulls. We save a few of those bulls for ourselves. So here on Blackbeard, we cut timber, we harvest sable palms for DOT operations all through Florida, residential operations. We cut sod, but primarily here we are a cow-calf operation. We still ride horses every time we work cattle. We have cow dogs. All the cowboys have cow dogs. We have horses. All the cattle are operated on every single ranch. We don't use motorcycles or side-by-sides. That we hold them up, and a lot of times we'll drive them 10 or 12 miles through the woods. So that's a little bit of an insight into what we are on all these different ranches.
I appreciate you taking the time to do that. You and your family have a lot going on. It sounds very interesting to me, everything that you mentioned there. So to kind of get on track with the main topic of today, which is virtual fence, share a little bit about what attracted you to this technology and kind of how you got introduced to it in a way where you were interested in trying it out.
I know where I was. I was in Orlando, Florida, the home of Disney World, the great mouse that changed Florida. And we were at a conservation meeting. And in the conservation meeting, we had a lot of nonprofits there. There was probably 1,000 people there. And we were talking about the growth of Florida, where Florida's going, and how to protect it. The Florida legislature recently passed a legislation in 3 years ago that said if we do a purchase of land with state funds, or we do a conservation easement, which is where they would buy the development rights, pay the rancher some amount of money, $3,000, $4,000 to $5,000, $6,000 an acre, we would then save those ranches forever and never be able to develop. That gives the rancher one more option to do something with his ranch if he needs cash flow or he's passionate about keeping these ranch lands the way his grandfather was. So we're at this meeting. They're giving a presentation. We're talking about wildlife. We have the Florida panther, the white-tailed deer. We have the most endangered bird species in North America, the Florida grasshopper sparrow. We're talking about how do we save these vast grassland ranches. We save all of these animals, but also importantly was how do we save water quality in these and keep them from being turned into pavement and rooftops, septic tanks. So during one presentation, there was one poignant picture of a barbed wire fence with a great amount of hair, and all of us in the ranching business know that a lot of times hogs or deer or different animals will go through our barbed wire fences, and it's a game trail. And so they go through them. There was some hair on the fence. Wasn't a dead animal in the fence, it was hair on the fence. That evening afterwards, I was sitting there with Juan Hernandez, which was our state conservationist for the state of Florida. And sitting there, and he goes, "Jim, have you ever heard about an invisible virtual fence?" And I said, "No, sir, I haven't." He goes, "Well, your ranch, I think, would be a perfect ranch to do a trial study that there's very few in the eastern United States. You might be the first one of scale if you would write a grant proposal to us to give you money to help implement these things." So I happen to have an intern here from New College, which is here in Sarasota, Florida, and I put her on it. She researched every product, every ownership, all over. She had a packet, looked like the Gutenberg Bible, that was about this thick. And so she gave it to me. The one that stood out by far, in my opinion, was the Vence product. So we wrote the grant. We got the grant. We got the money, and we started with Vence. And I can tell you that during that, you asked me how I got excited about it. During that, I knew nothing about it, to the point where we're getting ready to affix these collars and these units onto several hundred head of cow as a trial run. I became immersed in how many other things we could do, not just use it as a rotational grazing practice. Instead of building these fences and having all that capital improvement, and in Florida we live in the land of rainbows and hurricanes, and we're devastated by hurricanes across Florida nearly every year, that this system had so many opportunities in it. But I accompanied that with the knowledge of the staff with Vence were phenomenal. The people I dealt with were phenomenal. Our support staff were phenomenal. The ones that came down here and helped us install the radio towers. I think we have 7 or 8 radio cell towers that we installed here on our ranches. We cover about 7,000 acres now. So I was excited. I was really excited before we ever put the first one on. Not only that I could save on capital improvement cost, maintenance cost, if it works, but there were so many other opportunities, especially in the conservation and the environmental and the ecosystem world, that I saw down the road, because we are involved in conservation almost every day with our nonprofit. I forgot to tell you, we have a nonprofit called Florida Conservation Group. What we do is made up of ranchers and scientists, and we help ranchers facilitate conservation easements to where they can sell their development rights stay in business as long as they want, gives them a cash flow. So we have a lot of wildlife biologists. We have also grazing land specialists that work for us, master's degree with grazing land specialist. I have a master's degree weed scientist that works for us. So all of us are working together along with the Vence team before we ever installed the first collar. That was the longest run-on sentence you've ever heard, wasn't it?
You know, that's an interesting story. And I think, well, I know there's a lot we could dive into, but you seem especially passionate about the kind of to some people, you know, it looks like the secondary benefits that wildlife management conservation aspect that comes with the virtual fencing. I think a lot of people, when we first look at it and think about it, we think about the cross fencing rotational grazing side of it. But I'd really like to hear a little bit more about some specific examples of how you're using virtual fence to aid in conservation, work with the wildlife, and just some of those examples, if you don't mind.
I don't mind it one bit. One is of course, we all understand that a well-managed cattle ranch is a well-managed wildlife corridor, is a wildlife haven. We have a lot of different, aspects and variation of ecosystems that these edges promote the growth of white-tailed deer, Osceola turkey where we are, and bobwhite quail. But so let me do the wildlife portion of it, and then I can get into water quality and water quantity in here, because we live in Florida where I've got 1,000 by the end of the podcast. This time tomorrow there'll be 1,000 new residents in my state. Multiply that times 7 days, and you see the growth that we have. So with the wildlife, we're now able to move those cattle and segregate those cattle and identify perhaps birthing areas for wading birds. Here we have a somewhat species of listed concern with the burrowing owls, that if it's nesting time, we can eliminate cattle grazing from some of these areas. We can intensely graze some of those areas to where it's going to be more suitable for them to reproduce. So whether it's ducks or wading birds, Osceola turkeys, wildlife like quail, turkeys, we can manage those cattle of where they go and how much they graze or not graze. If it is nesting time for some of these nesting birds in our ephemeral wetlands, which we refer to as sloughs or ponds or creeks, but the ephemeral wetlands don't hold water year round, I can, by the stroke of a pen and just click, not by a pen, I can take a mouse. And with that mouse, I can build more fence in about 30 minutes than I could in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. Because I can go through, and at times, and we're getting ready to use this mouse to build about 50 miles of fence. And probably in about 30 minutes, that I'm going to fence off every ephemeral wetland that we have, because I've got water sources everywhere else. Our creeks are full, our ponds are full, it's raining, we're in hurricane season. I can click around all those ephemeral wetlands and eliminate cattle from going in there. That way the nesting birds have an opportunity. They don't have that issue. But more importantly than that, I am letting those natural grasses like big maiden cane, small maiden cane, and we do have West Indian marsh grass down here that we manage for grazing in these. I let that grow up. I've now stockpiled a lot of grass for the winter season, which starts in about November. Let's call it November in Florida. So I have now reduced or eliminated wholly any cows from going into those areas. I'm grown it up. Wildlife is just gone fantastic because they have that ability to hide from predators. The grass is higher. There comes into a lot of things in here. I'm not a wildlife biologist. My wife is. Besides being a rancher, she's a wildlife biologist, so I have one of the best, I think, in the state of Florida that's advising me on doing these things. Now, taking it further, that without these barbed wire fences, we all know that occasionally we will have an elk or a white-tailed deer or a mule deer or something hung up in a fence. We can't eliminate barbed wire fences. It just won't happen. But this gives us the ability to put a lot more fences up without that major cost and accomplish not only the grazing programs we want to facilitate on our different ranches, whether you're in Oregon or Florida. We have different ways that we are going to graze these cattle at different times of the year. We can accomplish that and help wildlife. So that's the story of wildlife. So the next story is of growth and water and quality. That living in Florida, we call it ridge to river to reef, that we have a spine of Florida, that we've got the mountains of Florida. We might elevate up to about 80 feet above sea level. You know, those of you in Montana that might be listening to this, that's the mountains of Florida. So that water, every drop of water that lands in Florida is either going to the Atlantic over on the east side or it's going to the Gulf of Mexico over on the west side. So it's going to go somewhere. Our huge population growth centers are along the coast of Florida. And so everybody is concerned with water because water is life in Florida. And so if we can protect those ephemeral systems, then we're doing a really great job with water quality and water quantity. And so that in itself helps. The next one is, I live again in hurricane and rainbow world. Hurricanes devastate us. I think on this one ranch we have 161 miles of fence. A lot of fencing. And I don't mean we don't have it cut up in paddocks of 40 acres. But we have a lot of fencing. The first thing I do, I have learned after putting these collars around cattle, and now I think we've got, I don't know, 500, 600, 700 head of cows on 3 different ranches covered by 7 cell towers. The first thing I do is see if the computer is on. If the computer comes up and I have power, which we do have generators here, if I have power and my cell towers have all survived, plus the big cell towers, and we happen to use Verizon cell service with our cattle. As soon as I get on the computer and I look at the screen, I can see where my cattle are. If it's working, I can see where my cattle are. And we just went through at times 165 mile an hour winds sustained at 120 mile an hour with gusts and 22 inches of rain. I can tell you I've gone through 3 hurricanes with the Vence system. And when I have clicked on it, if I have power on my computer, I have found that those cell towers withstood that. So now, with that being said, I can see where my cattle are. Because just prior to a hurricane hitting, we open every gate on every interior gate on every ranch. That at times we have an ocean that would cover thousands of acres in Florida. We are ranchers in Florida. A lot of us go through this, tremendous amount. I want those cattle to be able to walk or swim to go to high ground. I don't want them to be caught in a pasture where they get hung up on fences. So we open every gate. At that time, I can see where my cattle are. I can also install, in case I need to, a totally different fence around those cattle. And I can keep them from going to my perimeter fences. So now the safety of the public comes in. That I know where my cattle are. I know where 5 herds of cattle are scattered out over 7,000 acres, which is really strung out. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a kind of a long stream. That's the first thing I do. I can also then install a perimeter fence before I go look. And I think we've got close to 100 miles of perimeter, about 80 miles, probably 80 miles of perimeter fences on all our ranches. So I can see and see where the cattle are, install a perimeter fence. I just changed the whole dynamic. Triage. So we're doing triage. We don't want those cattle to get out. Then we can get on the swamp bogies. Then we can get on the airboats. Then we can go check those fences. So that's that. But now equate that to South Dakota, North Dakota. We get into a snowstorm and your fences are down. even if your cell towers blow over or covered with snow or they're hit by hurricanes, if we have the ability, this is Strickland looking on the road, that Vence has portable cell towers like a good FEMA run operation, which, Federal Emergency Management, that would come in. We can set these cell towers up. We can either do snow drifts or fires. We just had the fire in Texas. My friends in Texas, we went through a devastating fire. If we had a robust system that was affordable for these ranchers, then we could do the fire protection, snow protection, and hurricane protection. So that's where I'm really a believer, and become every day a bigger believer in the concept. But I'm very proud of what Vence has done for me as a producer and for the citizens of Florida, because we are out there protecting it.
There was a lot there to appreciate, but the natural disaster, weather's storm side of it is a side of virtual fencing that has not been shared on my show yet. So I think that's a new topic for this area that I really appreciate. I can't even fathom going through a hurricane. I can tell you what it's like to go through some nasty blizzards, but to go through a hurricane like that, I can see how that would be incredibly beneficial for you to be able to locate those cattle and probably have a lot of peace of mind once it's all over, to know where everything's at and know where to go.
I assure you, as soon as my people are good, because we have a lot of houses on different ranches, as soon as they're good, my family's good, the first thing we do is get on this computer that's in my office, and if it's up, if everything's up, then that's our first thing we do is click on Vence. After a hurricane, that's the first thing. Once family and my people are, then we're looking out after the welfare of our cattle. So that's the voice of a great amount of experience with hurricanes. I'm 70-year-old. We have been through devastating hurricanes, whether it's the timber industry in Florida and North Florida, the orange grove industry, we're in all of them, or the cattle industry. I would love to see this become a cost share practice within RCS, and it might be under EQIP, but I would really love to see this type of situation available for more people, because I think that the better we get, there's always room for improvement, and Vence is striving all the time to improve. We went through a lot of variations. We do a lot of testing. We do a lot of work with them. They come to the ranch. They've got great personnel that help us. So I'm just proud to be here talking about a product that I looked forward to, but it has exceeded every single expectation that I had.
I do want to talk about a little bit of how your team took to this technology, etc. But before we do that, I'd also like you to share about how you use it for creating better calving and safer calving environments for your herd as well. Because previously when we were on the phone, you were talking to me about alligators. So would you mind sharing that example as well? Because you're using it to also protect wildlife, but you're also using it to protect your cattle too.
I am. Well, Florida has a tremendous amount of alligators here. Particularly on one ranch that is just north of here, what we call Lost Girl Prairie Ranch. When I say prairie, that is the official designation for it, but there is at times close to 1,000 acres of water that is on that ranch, depending on hurricanes and depending on rainfall. On that ranch, we rode through one night down the dikes. We have 11 miles of dike that go through that ranch, and we counted 468 alligators that were over 6 feet long. Now, we're not talking about a 100,000 acre ranch, but at times, when water levels go up and water levels go down, the heat gets hotter or it gets colder. Alligators migrate and they pool up. At times, we would have 150, 200 alligators in, say, a 100, 200 acre area. And I mean, it looks like Gatorama. It looks like something you see out of Jurassic Park. Whenever you see that many 10-foot plus alligators fighting each other and rolling back in two, then you don't want your calves and your cows to be anywhere near that. So we build a fence with a mouse. So we can look at the water levels and sit right here. I can look on the water levels, and then I can make a fence around those areas where alligators congregate. One of the highest death losses we have here in our area is from alligators. We have panthers, we do have bears, but not enough panthers and bears. We don't worry about them. Alligators eat a lot of calves. Alligators eat a lot of our cow dogs whenever they jump in. So as those alligators migrate all across this one ranch, and they will migrate, breeding season they'll be here, hot season they'll be there, I can change my fences to keep my cattle. Now keep in mind, the cows have collars, but the calves don't. So we have to move that fence. Instead, we don't put it right next to the water. We move it far enough off that those calves, this is not a science, it's an art now, that we know how far a calf will graze away from his mother. And all your rancher friends are going, yep, I got it. I'm in Kentucky, but I know what he's talking about. So we utilize that. I can say that we have probably saved 30, 40 calves from getting eaten by alligators if we did not have the Vence system. So right now our steer calves this shipping season, which we're almost done, averaged $1,975 a head for our calves straight off the cow. I do easy math. I'm not a mathematician, but if I lose 20 or 30 head of calves to alligators times 1,900, well, that's our steer calves. Everybody will catch me on this one, but that's 1,600. Let's do an average of $1,700. That's a lot of money. A lot of money I save. So yes, you probably won't run into many ranchers using Vence for alligator protection. And I'm one of them. We use it, and it has been hugely beneficial. But to add to that, we can also then put a fence up on 2 feet, 3 feet of standing water. So if we decide to expand those areas, the alligators have migrated off, we're still going to have a few alligators that I can expand and put another 100, 200 acres in where they can graze. Whenever those native grasses grow up, we can expand it. Water levels go down, I can expand it. Alligators move further into deeper water, I can expand it. But then we can set it up where we can use the fence to actually bump those cattle back up to the hill. Now the hill in Florida is only about 40 foot above sea level. Keep in mind, that's my big hill down here in Florida. But so there's my alligator story. It's been a real learning experience.
I'm sure it has. Now, how did your cowboys and other employees take to this technology? What was their response?
Keep in mind that our cowboys are real cowboys, even though, we're in Florida and people always say, well, Florida got cattle ranches. Yes, we do. Every one of them is a good hand. And whenever I think we started making the base stations in the shop and having to help with the assistance and guidance of the Vence personnel that were down here, we're putting up many cell towers across the ranch, and they're trying to figure out, where's this going? Strickland's running after a shiny penny again. It's like, oh, let's try this. It probably got worse whenever we were assembling the collars and the units. And then we got into some of the things we were going to be able to do as we talked about them. And the Vence personnel were here talking about a success maybe in Oregon, or maybe my friend Mr. Bertram in Oklahoma. And Clay would come down here, and he had some of those on stocker cattle in Oklahoma and talk to us about it. When we started putting the collars on cattle, we learned a lot. We learned how tight, how loose. And so I think they got engaged. But I tell you, the ones that really embraced it were the cowgirls that work here. My ranch foreman's wife was here. We had two other ladies that help us a lot, that they took it seriously. That whenever we did a screw in or we started doing it, if you want it done right, hire a woman. Well, it really helped. Once they started seeing the results, they were all in. It was crazy that now I can call them, rather than them getting on, a four-wheeler or getting on a side-by-side and checking cattle, especially during calving season, because now, honestly, some of our herds I don't see during calving season but about once a week. But with this system, we could all meet here in the office and we can go over 3 herds and we can tell where that cow didn't move, that she might have a calving problem, or she might have gotten killed by an alligator, or she might be bogged up into a pond or a creek. And all of a sudden it made their job. Now they're peaked. Now everybody's sitting over my shoulder looking at the computer screen going, okay, where are the cattle moving? And with this system, we can see the grazing paths of how they graze. They'll know that if we gather those cattle at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to be in that pasture. History tells us by the Vence system, they're going to be there pretty much. They're creatures of habit. But now they can go, oh my gosh, look at that. Look, let me see. That's an alphanumeric number with a white tag 58-2. That's a bull. That bull's been staying in that same area all, for a week in breeding season. Well, we're going to go pull him out, because if that bull doesn't have a zest for life, he probably doesn't need to be in our herd. We'll go get him. But I don't know how many times that we have went to that collar that has been immobile and found a cow that's having a calving problem. She's bogged up in a ditch, or she's been hit by lightning. We are also the lightning capital of the world right here in this part of Florida. So a lot of animals will get killed by lightning. As somebody with Vence told me one time, that we're not dealing with interns with master's degrees, or BA or AA degrees, working for professors at a college, or some scientific. We're now dealing with cowboys that are just like the cowboys from California to Maine. That we're dealing with your people. Your people are some of the best people we know now. That cow crew that we have now, made up of 7, 8 men and women, that they are getting so fast and so proficient at changing batteries, tightening, replacing, doing all these different things, that we've actually had some Vence people from around the world. We do have housing here. They've come here and helped us, and I think they learn from us because they're dealing with the end user of this product. They're not dealing with a research facility somewhere that has every opportunity to succeed. They're now dealing with the dirt and the grime and the mud and the blood and the broken fences and everything else that goes wrong, and that type of strata of humans that are going to be using this across all these ranches across America and, of course, worldwide. So they now love it. At the very beginning, it was a little tough, very beginning, but now they love it. I think that they've also become proud that we were one of the first ranches of size in the eastern United States that really put it into use. And I thank, going back, NRCS for embracing this concept and introducing me to this concept, and to the Vence personnel that have really made it a success, along with my staff.
So it sounds like there was a little hesitation at the beginning that might have been a challenge, but that has since been overcome as the technology has been used and benefits have become very clear. Are there other challenges that you experienced that you think maybe other ranchers should be aware of before they start, just to help them get started on the right foot?
The right foot with the product? Yes, I can. It's not for everybody. It's not for everybody. But then the finest wine in the world is not for everybody. They'd rather have a beer. I get a lot of questions from people that want to do a very intensive program where, it's like, well, I want to mob graze 5-acre tract with 100 head of cows. It won't work. Not at this point, because you have a battery, and battery has a battery life, of which, by the way, Vence has really improved. They're continuing to improve on their product. Every time that cow, if you can find a large group of animals in a small area, they're going to bump those fences. They're going to get the auditory. They're going to get the little nudge. And every time they do that, it uses up battery life. Vence has done a great job of getting not only the batteries better, but the compartment that holds the unit much better. It's just wonderful. In those situations, it won't work. Now, maybe in the future it will, because we are always improving. That's why it's great to be with a company that has a research and development arm that is really working at striving to make things better, more affordable, more efficient. So that is something that I would say is not going to be for everybody, but if you get into bigger country where they're at least, like 50, 100-acre tracts with not as many animals, then yes. And I like the fact that in big country you can start bumping those cattle. Set that Vence system. Bump them, bump them, bump them. If one of them runs back through oh, by the way, this is an invisible fence between my fingers right here. And if they run back on this side, they won't get shocked or get whenever they come back through. So, it's a great system. If you have something outside the system, cattle are herd animals. They're going to try to go back with the herd, particularly in mosquito season and fly season in Florida and a lot of other states. So that is really great. But I think that would be the one drawback. Other than having the right facilities to be able to utilize this system whenever you restrain the animals, all of our cattle pens have hydraulic chutes, but a good manual chute will work just as well. And having the right staff that buys into it. And training that staff. By the way, I'm not the guy that runs a computer program here and goes through all the training programs. Like we used to meet on every Friday with Vence as we were learning the system. That it's actually my ranch foreman's wife, Cassidy, and she's adept at. I tell her what I want to accomplish. I can do it over the phone now and say, look, I'm down here. I want to cut off 500 acres now. See if there's any animals in there. Let's fence off this. Leave it fenced off for the next 3 months. Things like that. One thing we haven't talked about when we talk about big country is, Bureau of Land Management, public grazing lands. I think that this is going to be something that if you will, the government people that are helping us in partnership, we're grazing government lands, and if we can work together with this system, I see just unlimited opportunities going into the future to fulfill the goals of us grazing that land, also providing a benefit. It might be fire protection. It might be, grazing some of these lands that we can reduce the fire load down. There may be some sort of species of grass that we can concentrate those cattle on. So I think that that's one of the next big opportunities as we go forward.
Absolutely. I have a friend in Idaho who I actually had her on the show, and they started using virtual fence because they graze public lands where there were fires, and they face the option of basically we have to sell a lot of our cows, or we can utilize this technology and virtual fence off where we can let our cows graze. So there's a lot of possibility there. Now, Jim, as we kind of come to the end of our conversation, what questions do you think ranchers should ask themselves before they invest in before they invest in this product?
You have to be committed to do something. And so we now have New World screwworms coming in out of South America, government had to make a huge commitment to eradicate those. You have to make a commitment because you're going to have a cash outlay. You're going to have a maintenance cost, but it's no different than everything else we do. If we're in the hay baling business, we buy hay balers and we maintain them. You're in the cattle business, you're going to have fences and trucks and trailers and horses and dogs, and you got to maintain them. They have to make a commitment to the process of putting those collars on correctly, managing those collars correctly, and how to utilize them. You also are going to have to look at the cost. That nobody gets a free ride. That look at the cost and make sure that, and that goes if you buy a new pickup truck, you're going to look at the cost. If you're going to install a fence, is it going to be 3-strand, 5-strand, or post this big or post that big? You look at the cost and look at that as a tool, not only to do rotational grazing, but I think it's also a good story, because I'm big on good stories, because all of us ranchers have to relate with the population that vote in all our politicians, that make all the laws that regulate all of us. We don't have a lot of votes out here. On our ranches, I have 7 votes. Next door, you've got 7 votes in one house. So we have to be able to defend. And I think what we've talked about today is the rotational grazing, the environmental aspect, the wildlife aspect, the disaster aspect, that if you can tell and bring people to your ranch and explain to them what you're doing, that I think they're going to embrace us as an industry by looking at those ranchers that are trying it and doing it as being one of the next big success stories in agriculture. We're talking about AIs, we're talking about drones in the farming aspect. We use drones, we use helicopters, we use a lot of different things. This is something that people will understand, because the first question that I get back from somebody that hears about that is it like a dog fence? We buried a wire, we buried this wire. We don't do dog fences. And I was like, theoretically, yeah, it is kind of like that, where you can't see it, but your dog knows it's there. Same thing with the cattle industry.
I think your stories and examples and insight into this have been incredibly valuable to not only myself, but everyone listening to this podcast. Jim, I will definitely put links to Vence in the show notes, but is there a website where people can learn more about what you're doing or anything like that you would like me to share?
Sure. Is this the self-promotion arena? All right. Okay. All right. Well, everybody go down to their local liquor store and buy Blackbeard Ranch rum. We don't own Blackbeard Ranch rum. We own a lot of Blackbeard Ranch products. One is Blackbeard's Ranch. Just Google Blackbeard's Ranch. You can see a lot of the things that we do. I think it's blackbeardsranch.com. The other one is Strickland Ranch. You can't tell the difference. There's a lot of different places, but Strickland Ranch. Lost Girl Prairie is that's where the Alligators are, is Lost Girl Prairie Ranch. There's a long story behind Lost Girl that is the history of Florida tied up in there. And then Florida Conservation Group. That is our conservation group that is made up of scientists, a lot of scientists, grazing land specialists, landscape level conservationists, and ranchers. And we started that 12 years ago to help ranchers. So look under Florida Conservation Group, Blackbeard's Ranch, Strickland Ranch, and Lost Girl Prairie Ranch.
All right. Well, for those of you listening, don't worry, you don't have to remember all those. I'll make sure they end up in the description if you want to learn more about that. And certainly check out the Vence link in the description as well to learn more about that technology. As Jim highlighted today, and as we've been kind of highlighting throughout the year on this show, there's a lot of benefits there. And no matter how you implement it, if you're committed to it, it sounds like you're really going to find more than one way that it's going to benefit your operation. So with that, be sure to check out those resources. Remember, the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find the conversation valuable. But with that, happy ranching, folks.